Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Great Shot, Kid, the podcast on the Nerd Party Network that looks at the behind-the-scenes workings of the films you love to love and hate. I'm John.
And I'm Mike.
And this week we are going to be looking at some interesting things that have been said out there with some behind-the-scenes work and directors and some of their projects that are upcoming. But, of course, if you want to reach out to us, you can go to thenerdparty.com/contact, look up Great Shot Kid. You can go over to Join Nerd Party on Twitter, hashtag Great Shot Kid, and let us know that you're listening. You can reach out to us on Facebook at facebook.com/thenerdparty. Again, use the hashtag Great Shot Kid, and over on Instagram at The Nerd Party. So to kick things off, actually, this week we've looked at the works of, or at least a work of, Brian De Palma in the past, a very, I guess, successful but sometimes contentious director out there. And apparently Mr. De Palma had a quote in a French magazine about Steven Soderbergh.
Yes, this was, posted on Twitter. It's a translation into English. Posted by Nick Newman. And he tweets... This is a quote from Brian De Palma. Steven Soderbergh, a visual director? Are you kidding? Give me an example of a great, visually memorable scene at Soderbergh or a silent sequence based on the staging. I saw an episode of The Knick, and there is nothing that really blushed me visually in. Obviously, the translation is whatever. But
Yeah.
You get the general idea.
Yeah.
Brian De Palma's insane.
Okay, look, everybody knows you're the Soderbergh scholar. We all know that. And I've been coming around very slowly on Mr. Soderbergh. I just recently finally saw Out of Sight and loved it. Absolutely loved it. Thought it was great. But for De Palma to make that sort of comment is nuts. I mean, if anything, like, Soderbergh's visual style is instantly recognizable. I could sit down and turn something on and never seen it before and say, oh, this looks like Steven Soderbergh. Like, for him to say there's nothing visually distinctive, that is crazy. What would motivate a director to say that about another director's work? Isn't that like the ultimate insult?
I guess so, And it's also like, when you think about, I mean, I don't know, more than almost any other filmmaker, like, you hear Soderbergh talk about his process and everything, and it's so extremely well thought out, his visual style.
Yeah.
No matter what it is he's doing, whether he's, shooting a movie with an iPhone, like Unsane or whatever, or The Knick, which is a television show, which he was doing at like a breakneck speed. It's all got, a very, very, not just distinct visual style, but well thought out visual style. I mean, I think he's the guy who said that he can tell by watching, like, after the first 3 shots, I think, of a movie, he can tell whether or not the director knows what they're doing visually, which I think is a really interesting sort of game to play. But I mean, you just like read his blog where he's talking about, film theory and everything like that, whether he's talking about On Her Majesty's Secret Service and the cutting patterns, or whether he's talking about, the black and white, version of Raiders of the Lost Ark that he put together with nothing but music from The Social Network as a way of sort of pinpointing what makes the compositions and the editing in that movie work so well, or whether he's talking about 2001 or anything, anything really,
I honestly, I mean, the thing is that this has got to be, I'm really hoping to hear something from De Palma sort of clarifying that, because first and foremost, anybody who has read a ton of behind-the-scenes stuff about Star Wars knows De Palma was notoriously harsh with Lucas when he viewed, like, the first rough cut of Star Wars and stuff like that. But, like, like De Palma is a director where I think that's very much, watch out the stones you're throwing in glass houses there, because it's not, as much as I love, and I have a big soft spot for like Carlito's Way, there's nothing in that where I watch that and go, only De Palma could have done that shot, or, oh, wow. Like, it's a good movie that's well put together and well written. I don't sit there and say, oh my gosh. I mean, maybe earlier De Palma, you could say there's a really distinctive style there, but I don't get the motivation of one director throwing shade at another, especially in a public forum. That just doesn't make any sense.
I mean, he's got, those like split diopter shots and everything, which, sometimes scream, yes, this is De Palma, but, is it any more sort of like enlightened, or I don't know what word you would use to describe it, but what does it add to the movie, which is any more or less than what Soderbergh brings to the table?
You know what I think it is? Because I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about it. If you held the two visual styles of these directors up, I could see somebody like De Palma looking at something Soderbergh does and not getting where the dynamism is in it. Soderbergh doesn't use, in the ones that I've seen that he's done, he doesn't use anything what I would call flashy. There's not, to point out what you're talking about with like the diopter shot or something like that. There's nothing that is a, oh, look what I can do moment about it. It really is about, he knows how to get that camera, because for instance, I'm thinking about Out of Sight, right? And I think I said this to you, the word that always pops to my mind, and not just because of the music that he uses, but the if you even took the music out of a movie that Soderbergh has done, you would think the word jazz. The way things are put together, there's a very natural flow, but it's not that there's any particularly showy moment that happens. It's just a matter of knowing where, because there's the shot of Clooney leaving the bank that he robs in the very beginning. And as he's walking by, he pulls the trick of talking to the guy who's sitting at the desk to make the girl at the counter think that he's talking to his partner. The guy has no idea who he is. And the way that the camera is set up, it doesn't look terribly dynamic, but if you look at it, you can see it's a little bit off of where you would expect a camera setup to be. It's like a little off to the left, and therefore conveys this sort of off-kilter moment for the guy sitting at the desk that Clooney talks to. The camera doesn't fix on Clooney. The camera doesn't do anything like that. It's just there, and it's about just conveying that sort of looser moment, so to speak, whereas I guess De Palma is more about the elaborate setup, maybe. And pulling off, because the thing is, we looked at that movie Sisters of his, and there was, the split screen moments were really interesting that they pulled off with that. But, I don't know.
And Soderbergh does that too at times, when he's getting a bit more goofy or whatever. He does that in like the Ocean's movies. I just watched all the Ocean's movies this week. And, those are, in a lot of ways, a lot different from the movies that he sometimes makes on a smaller scale. I remember him talking about how, like, he was getting ready to make Ocean's 11, and he had never made a movie like that before, so he started studying the masters in that field, like Spielberg and John McTiernan. And, when you see, I remember hearing that and thinking like, oh, it's going to look like Die Hard, and then you see the actual finished product, and it's like, it does have that glossiness, but through that Soderbergh lens, so to speak.
Right.
Like, it's still feels like it's, natural lighting, and it's really grainy and handheld and everything. But, shot for $200 million or whatever. There's something about that contrast which I really like. But then you look at something like Solaris, which is like the glossiest, cleanest movie you've ever seen, obviously very heavily influenced by 2001. and I mean, you just see that guy's range, But I mean, it's true. I mean, he said this on numerous occasions that his style is very much about being unobtrusive to the actors and to the environment. That's why he's shooting on an iPhone, not because he thinks it looks great, and not because it's cheap, but because it's super duper small and allows him to put the camera pretty much anywhere he wants, and the actors almost won't notice,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
That's sort of what he's been, I think, striving for his entire career. And, I mean, but then you turn around and you look at something like The Knick, which, De Palma brings up in this quote, and it's like, God, I don't know. Have you seen The Knick at all?
I haven't, because that's on a pay channel, and we all know how I feel about those.
Yeah. It's so good. It's kind of a throwback to older Soderbergh, towards the end of his career. He started getting away from the handheld stuff and started doing things, with these lockdown, tableau shots or whatever. And, with The Knick, it's got that immediacy, that rush that you see in things like Traffic and everything, but still, shot with that red camera, which is just absolutely gorgeous looking. I mean, it's like the highest, production value you'll see, but, in an hour-long television show, and it's a knockout. I mean, it's one of the best shows, I mean, ever, let alone in recent years.
See, it's interesting, though, because, as we're sitting here talking about Soderbergh, one of the things that I have not gone back, and I feel almost now that I've gone on a little bit of a journey. I think there's more of his that I should watch first. But I remember years and years ago, and I'm sure I've shared this with you before, like I saw Traffic. I didn't like it. Yeah. I didn't like it, like, at all. And I don't know what it was that grated me, because I look at his other stuff and I'm like, I dig this, I dig this, I dig this. I don't know, was I just in a bad mood that day or something like that? But, like, I'm very curious after I, get an even better feel for him, what I'll think of Traffic when I go back and watch it. The only thing I really remember positively from Traffic was that I thought that, naturally Benicio del Toro was fantastic. But I mean, okay, is water wet too? Yes, it is.
I love everything about Traffic. I mean, definitely I was ready for that movie when it came out. I had seen Out of Sight and enjoyed it quite a bit, but then when The Limey came out, I saw it late, but it was like one of those things where it was playing downtown, and I kept on walking by the theater and seeing that poster, which is, one of the best posters I've ever seen, and thinking, like, that looks really cool. I don't know anything about that movie, but I should see it. And I went home and I watched the trailer online, and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. It's like an art house action movie, from the director of Out of Sight, but it looks like Out of Sight, but with that such a smaller budget. And then, I saw it and I loved it. And then Aaron Brockovich came out just a couple months later, and that was so different and yet also great. And I just really loved the idea that this guy could, like, pretty much do anything at any scale and just bounce back and forth. And Traffic really seemed like this was going to be the culmination of everything that he had done up to that point. And in a lot of ways it was. And it just kind of hit all the right buttons for me, like in terms of the way that it was shot and especially the way that it was edited. And it just really, really spoke to me at the time, because that was sort of like the way that I would have made a movie if I were making movies at that point in time,
This is interesting, this conversation, because I'm sitting here. Last week you played armchair psychiatrist with me, so I'm not going to turn it back around on you, but I actually have a question. I don't know is there something about where somebody's favorite director informs us about how that director influenced what they like, or did they gravitate toward that director because of the nature of what they liked. Like it's sort of a chicken and egg sort of thing, but like, were you always predisposed, and then when you found Soderbergh, it went along with your sort of worldview and wishes into blah, 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 and that's why you latched onto him? Or is it something where you saw the right Soderbergh movie at the right time, and it reformulated what you want out of a film, and so it sort of like changed your tastes, and that's why he's always going to be sort of at the top for you?
I don't know. I was always like a fan of like that handheld sort of like pseudo documentary style. I mean, like going back to like Homicide, Life on the Street, you know, the TV show.
Oh yeah.
And like that was, you know, so to see that like in a movie, you know, that's what Traffic is for sure. I mean, every single shot in that movie I think is handheld, you know, with the exception of one, which is where like the helicopter is landing or something like that, you know, and it's all like done as if someone was standing there with a camera, you know, and I mean even like down to the sound mix, where they got like halfway through mixing the movie, you know, in 5.1 surround sound, and then the mixer was like, you know, if this is supposed to be sort of like a documentary style, really it should just be mono. And then they folded down the entire movie into mono aside from the music. You know, it's a mono movie just because that goes along with like the visual style.
That's crazy.
It is, but it's awesome. And, you know, I mean, just like that sort of way of thinking, right? And the fact that he, you know, as someone who is a fan of, you know, a bunch of types of movies, and this guy was making all of those, right? But still never losing his voice. I mean, that I think is what kind of really spoke to me, but also the idea that you could really kind of like mainline his work because he was releasing something every 6 months, you know? And it was like all those things together, I think just sort of were like the perfect storm for me, so that when Traffic came out, like I was really sort of like on board the Soderbergh train and you know, just full speed ahead, you know, and it didn't disappoint at all.
You know, I don't know. You know, there's always that question too of, will we see a breakthrough? Because, you know, we talked about how in the 90s there's this, you know, explosion of original directors and everything like that. Do you think that things have just gotten too diluted now? Like the tools are out there for everybody. And who was it? It was I forget the name of the producer, but in Side by Side, he said to Keanu Reeves, you know, we've lost the tastemakers, we've lost the gateway, and so things are just, you know, it's just there's too much everywhere, and that's why everything, you know, the quality has diluted. I mean, basically all of that, just like a really roundabout way, I guess, just to ask, like, do you see an environment where somebody like a Soderbergh can come up again? You know, can and carve like an actual career out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Soderbergh would be the first person to say, you know, like it's better now than it was before because everybody has all the tools at their disposal, you know? I mean, right now I'm holding the camera that Soderbergh used to shoot his last movie, you know, in my hand.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was in my pocket when I went to go see that movie, you know, on the big screen in 4K. And I just, you know, he's always sort of been about that, always been about, like, making the technology accessible to everyone. And to the point that he made, you know, Full Frontal as a way of kind of, like, saying, like, this is what I would have made if I were getting started today. This would have been my first feature because I can shoot something on, you know, a Canon XL1 and, you know, it'll look good enough to put up there on the screen, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I think that it's a good thing. You know, yeah, there might be a lot of extra crap to wade through, but at the same time, a lot more people are getting a lot more opportunities, and there's a much greater chance of finding the next Soderbergh because, you know, and I mean, and you look at like the people who he's supporting, as filmmakers, it's usually pretty obscure. Like you look at like The Girlfriend Experience and how he, basically handpicked the two people to create and direct every episode of that show, and it's Amy Seimetz and Lodge Kerrigan, who are both, super indie directors, and I don't know. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a bad thing by any stretch, but I think that I don't know. I guess I'm just one of those, I have the gloomier, I guess, more pessimistic view of it from the career standpoint, right? Like anybody can put something up on YouTube and stuff like that, but like Soderbergh has always, he was the first one to release a film simultaneously in the theaters and on demand at the same time, wasn't he?
He was one of the first, yeah.
Why did I think he was the first?
Just
because he was the first that garnered headlines?
Yeah, it could have been. It was a big deal at the time, but
Okay.
I don't necessarily know that it was the first. Yeah.
You know what? Actually, that triggers a memory. I remember working very late at night because we had a launch overnight for a site, and sitting there and saying, I got to turn something on to stay awake. It's like Nightmare on Elm Street 3. I'm like putting instant coffee into Coca-Cola. It was like, got to stay awake, got to publish the thing. And I remember there was a channel. I don't know if it still exists or not. And for some reason, I want to say Mark Cuban was like an owner in it. FearNet?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that was where they released, was it Land of the... It wasn't Land of the Dead. It was, I can't remember that. But it was the one where they were keeping the dead in like these pens. And the movie was so obviously shot for like nothing. And the guy who played Wyndham Earl was the lead. But it was the Something of the Dead, of course.
Diary of the Dead? Or
no, not Diary of the Dead.
Was it Romero or not?
I'm pretty sure it was Romero.
Okay.
And it might have been Living with the Dead, or it was some title like that, because Diary of the Dead I remember watching and falling asleep very early into that film. Like I was grateful that it was a rental, because if I'd fallen asleep in the theater, I would have felt very cross with myself. But I actually fell asleep watching Diary of the Dead. But it was the one before that. And I just remember seeing it and I remember being blown away because FearNet was sitting there and they were saying, like, this movie's not even in theaters and you can watch it for free here on this channel. I was like, oh, cool. This is great. This is the future is now. And, this is a few years ago before Netflix was really doing original programming and stuff like that.
Yeah, they did it for the Soderbergh movies, and it was supposed to be like 6 of them or something like that. The idea was they were going to like go across the country and find, like the real America or whatever, shoot in these like small towns with local people, who are not professional actors, and tell these stories. And they only did 2 of them essentially before they stopped. But they would release them simultaneously in theaters, on DVD, and on this channel, HDNet. And I remember, like, we didn't get the channel here in Chicago or whatever, but we, had a landmark theater, which is Mark Cuban's theater company, and they were releasing it, but for some reason, like a couple days before, I went to the Borders down the street from where I worked, and they had a copy of this was Bubble, the first one, sitting on the shelf, like a couple days before it was supposed to be released. So I'm like, oh, yoink, let me grab this and take it home and watch it, now. And I had at the time like a video projector set up in my living room. So, watching movies on the big screen was something that I could do, at my house, and it would probably be a better experience than watching it at this particular theater, which it was playing at, which usually had some pretty terrible projection quality. So, and it would have been on 35 millimeter film, which didn't seem to make any sense since the whole thing was shot digitally and all that stuff. So, yeah, I just bought the DVD and watched it and fell in love instantly. Have you ever seen Bubble?
I have not. But all you talking about the the presentation stuff. It's you know, I loved Solo, but the first time I watched it, you know, I told you I was in Theater 3 at AMC Disney Springs, where the two of us saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And if you recall, that theater was not their best theater. It was a small. It was that, well, you know, the screen was basically like, I remember sitting there and I loved the movie, but I remember in the back of my mind, I'm gonna like this better at home visually. Like I was just like, I know I'm gonna get, because I was actually sitting in a row where like the exit light was too bright, and everything. But then I just saw it again in Dolby Cinema. I mean, it was like it was the same sort of magic of seeing movies when I was a kid again, where it was like, this is a special event. This feels like something different and special, worth watching, and paying the money to go see. Yeah, but all that to say, just in response to that, I haven't seen Bubble. So.
Yeah, I haven't been, because they just built that one in Disney Springs, and I think they went all out with that one. Don't they have like the video hallway or whatever?
They do. It's pretty great.
Or did they just have like people? Because I know like the original plan was to have like basically landscapes or whatever for the movie that you were watching, so it was like you were entering that world, which seems like the perfect thing to do with Solo. But then like I saw a picture of it and it was just like they're standing there.
It rotates through people and you can see some backgrounds and stuff like that, and it plays the cool music from the trailer and everything, and it's like beauty shots of like people looking at the camera like, hey, welcome to the movie. And it was pretty cool. Like everybody that was walking by it would stop and like take pictures or record it or something like that, because I thought it was just so neat.
Check that out. Yeah,
and the thing is that wall screen was better than the theater I originally saw Solo in. So go figure. I guess
that's the thing they're talking about now, is these LED screens, like literally like television screens.
Yeah, that doesn't seem right for some reason. That just doesn't seem. I mean, it's literally just watching television then.
Yeah.
And granted, film doesn't have some sort of like magic transference, but at the same time, I don't know. It just seems like a step away from what makes things special. Another step away from it. So,
yeah. What are you gonna do? Technology, it marches on, I guess, or something.
Oh, I know. And I did check. The one I saw on FearNet was Survival of the Dead, which is the one after Diary of the Dead.
Okay, all right.
So
yeah. I mean, Soderbergh, like he's there's like some sort of like infamous press conference or something that was done at some film festival where it was like a bunch of directors talking about, this whole thing and day and date, video versus, movie theaters or whatever. And apparently, Soderbergh was up there basically saying, like, for a movie like Bubble or The Girlfriend Experience, I don't really care if people see it in the theater. It's not going to add a whole lot or whatever. If it's easier for them to watch it at home, then that's fine with me. And M. Night Shyamalan was on the panel as well, and he was like, you're insane, theaters are the way to go, that's the only place to watch movies, blah, blah, blah. And I guess the two of them kind of went at it at this panel. But I'm with Shyamalan on this one, to be honest. But, what can you do? I just spent basically the entire weekend watching Stanley Kubrick movies on the big screen because, hey, why not, right?
I'm kind of jealous because I have never seen a Kubrick movie on the big screen. I've only ever seen them at home.
Yeah. I saw 2001 a couple weeks ago in 70 millimeter.
I'm so mad because there's no plans to bring it to my area, and I keep checking the site. No plans at this time. Screw you guys.
Yeah. It's one of those things. It's funny because like a year ago, one of the theaters in the city commissioned the production of a new 70 millimeter print of 2001 that they could own and keep forever, right? And show
Yeah.
whenever they wanted. And they showed it last year, and yeah, it looked great. You know, it was brand new print. Although the whole time I was thinking, especially, you know, now that I've been introduced to, you know, laser projection and everything, like what they use with the Dolby Cinema, I'm like, you know, these black levels aren't very good. You know, everything just kind of mushes together when it gets to a certain, you know, level of gray. But I'm like, yeah, it just looks great. You know, I mean, it's like a pristine print. And then they do this whole thing, this whole like, oh, re-release for the 50th anniversary, the unrestored, you know, because it's, you know, Christopher Nolan, even though, what does that mean, unrestored? It's a little, I don't know.
Oh, well, I think that's just because people have gotten used to the idea of the special edition version being re-released. And so I think that I actually agree with their choice to basically call out, we didn't make any changes.
There's a difference between not making changes and restoring a movie, though, you know? I mean, there's a difference between a restoration and a revision.
To you and me, there is.
Okay.
To you and me, there is. I would argue that that there is a disconnect in the general public, where I think that we sometimes, not just you and me, but like, you know, the people that travel in our circles and everything, we get some blinders on sometimes about stuff. Like, you know, even all the online stuff right now about how, you know, Star Wars and Star Trek fans are fighting about blah, 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 blah. I could mention that to my wife or any of my neighbors, and they'd look at me and they'd say, what? What are you talking about? I don't know. And if I say 2001 is coming back to movie theaters, the first question out of their mouths is, did they change anything? Mm-hmm. So if I say they have an unrestored, that's immediately going to say to people, oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, and they could restore the hell out of the print, but they got to have a word that lets the average film goer know we didn't touch it. We didn't cut anything. We didn't splice anything. We didn't. I mean, and the thing is, that's a shame because I actually think how far it's come. Because I remember when Scorsese sat on that restoration, they made a big deal about the fact that they were like, oh, well, we restored this and we color corrected this and we went back to the notes and we remixed this scene, you know, and probably some of the same things happened with this, but I don't know. It's like a minefield now.
I don't think that there's that much that happened with it. I think it's more like, you know, it's not as purely unrestored. You know, I think they picked and chose certain elements to use in order to, you know, get it to where it is. And you know, and like I wasn't, you know, I went back to see it just because I wanted to see, like, okay, you know, this theater which just bought this print, you know, now second year that they have it, they're gonna just not show it. They're gonna show this other print which is brought in, which is supposedly better. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, this really isn't any better. And there is some actual like film damage on there, like that was on like the negative, where I'm like, I don't remember seeing that on the version that I saw last year. It's quite possible that the version we saw last year was actually better, but I'm curious about that, you know, for sure.
I don't know. You know, that whole thing too turns into that whole fetish of, it's like, you know, I hate to keep going back to this, but like LPs where people are like, oh, well, you hear, you know, yeah, okay, it's got a more dynamic range of sound, but I also hear like pops and hiss and stuff, you know. If the trade-off is that I'm getting better sound, you know, like with less background static, yeah, I think most of us would make the trade-off. And, you know, instead of an unrestored, if they were like, well, we fixed a few things that got screwed up in the original print, it'd be like, yeah, okay, that's cool.
It's not even that. It could be just like, well, we chose to use, you know, this negative over here, you know, which may not be the first generation, but it was made before the first generation was damaged. So, you know,
yeah.
I mean, that is kind of like that. But whatever. I mean, like, that's the thing about this. And this kind of goes back to Soderbergh, where Soderbergh's like, you listen to some of the stuff that, you know, Stanley Kubrick said when he was alive about, you know, photographing movies and the types of experiments that he was trying on things like Barry Lyndon with, you know, shooting with candlelight And, the idea that he was using these film stocks for, certain reasons because the image was super stable and wouldn't, jump or weave or anything like that. Soderbergh's like, I'm fairly certain that if Kubrick were alive today, he would shoot digital instead of film, because digital can do all the things that he tried to do with film, which no one else could do with film. So, and, you hear, like, and this is why they were showing all these, Kubrick movies, is because there's this new documentary out called Film Worker about this guy, Leon.
He's like right-hand man.
Yeah,
right?
Leon Vitali. Or is it Leo Vitali? I forget. Anyway, yeah, he's his right-hand man. And he like, I remember reading an interview with him, where they were like, oh, did Stanley Kubrick see like digital projection? What did he think? And he's like, yeah, we saw some scenes from 2001 projected digitally, and he really loved it. He was really excited about the idea of digital projection. And it's like you hear like all these things, and I'm like, I'm fairly certain, that
well, doesn't that also get back to just made reference to the people being a-holes to each other over Star Wars and Star Trek. Couldn't you therefore make the argument then, especially with like certain things having to do with film and stuff like that, that to an extent we're all on like a scale, but some people gravitate more toward they're in love with what it meant as opposed to what it really is? Sure.
And I mean, like, Nolan, falls on that spectrum. Nolan, who's heading up this project and everything, is like, film is a magical thing for me. When I watch a print, it makes me feel a certain way, and this is the way that I felt watching this print of 2001, and I want to feel that way again. And it's like, okay, that's cool, but is this really about, like, preserving the art, or is it about preserving the feeling you had while you watched this art? Because Kubrick might come in and be like, you know what? I just saw Solo in Dolby Cinema, and that's the way that I want people to watch 2001.
Honestly, that's the way I want to watch 2001.
Yeah.
I can't lie.
And they're working on, well, like a 4K. Well, it's probably done at this point. It was supposed to come out. I think it was supposed to be out now, like on video, but then they held off because they were doing this 70mm release.
So Christopher Nolan ruined that. Huh?
Yeah, but let's also remember, like, the reason why. I mean, not to get all cynical about this, but the reason why, I think, honestly, the only reason why 2001 is getting a 70mm release is because Warner Brothers, thanks to Christopher Nolan, is sort of leading the charge of keeping 70mm alive. And they have a certain incentive,
right,
to do so, because they want these theaters to keep all this equipment in place so that the next time, Christopher Nolan has a movie come along, that he'll still be able to show it in 70mm. All right. Admirable things, but also, they're starving for content, which is why, like, Fantastic Beasts, or Kong Skull Island, which were shot digitally, are getting 70mm releases,
And ironically, Kong Skull Island was a better movie than Fantastic Beasts. So go figure that one out.
Ironic about that. That's just plain old common sense. But, like, I saw Kong Skull Island in 70mm, and the director was like, this is awesome. This is awesome that this movie is getting released in 70mm. But he also said, like, in the Q&A afterwards, like, to be honest, like, he's like, I'm not Christopher Nolan. I didn't have the time or the resources to put into making this 70mm print look exactly the way that I wanted to. And honestly, the colors are kind of off. And if, you want my completely honest opinion of the whole situation, it looks better in digital than it does in 70 millimeters. So sorry, guys. But still, the idea, like he was very much in favor of the idea of it being released in 70 millimeter, just because that's what he grew up with, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
But like, you know, I'm sitting there watching all of these Kubrick movies in 35 millimeter and thinking like, these should be digital. And there is definitely a thing. I mean, like, this same theater, they're going to be showing like Mad Max Fury Road in 35 millimeter, like later on this month. And it's like, okay. I mean, like,
that's an odd choice.
Why? You know, it's not gonna, I don't know. Why not just show it digitally? It's
maybe because Warner Brothers wants to atone for the fact that they screwed the pooch out of the 2 other Mad Max movies we could have gotten.
I doubt that's what it is. I think it's, you know, discretion.
Yeah, no, I know that's not what it is. It's just I just wanted to get a pot shot in there because that story about how you can be so it just makes me sad.
Yeah,
it makes me really, really sad.
Hey, you never know.
So,
I mean, who would have thought we would have gotten Mad Max Fury Road? You know, after X amount of years. So. Never say never.
Just after Beyond Thunderdome, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So, which of course everybody loves to love, but let's be honest, folks.
It's not a good movie at all.
No, it really isn't.
Yeah,
it really isn't. But you know, Mad Max Fury Road was a good idea, and another good idea is to reach out to Mad Mike online. So, Mike, where can people get a hold of you online?
You can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K, and you can also find me on my website, filmdamagepod.com, where we have a podcast called Film Damage, where we talk all about crazy projection things.
They're fascinating projection things.
Sometimes, yeah.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
And we talk about other things, too. Like, we just talked about, like, the Sense8 finale and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, of course, you can find me online. I'm at Kessel Junkie on Twitter. You can find me right here on the network co-hosting Aggressive Negotiations with Matthew Rushing. And you can find me co-hosting Words with Nerds with my pal Craig. So until next week, the balcony is closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.